Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri diary series and also letter series. As it turns out, we'll be doing another 1908 letter today. I wasn't sure what we'd be doing, but yeah, that's it. And hopefully tomorrow, or at least at some point this weekend, I'll have a new 1917 translation. So, what did we have yesterday? Yesterday we did a letter, more of a note, that Dmitri sent to Maria on the 14th of July, 1908. And it was just toilet humor. Apparently she, made some comment about him being, just watch the video if you want to. I'm not going to embarrass myself by going into that. It's less than 6 minutes long, that particular video. We do have some more toilet-related material today, although it's not along the same lines. I didn't point out yesterday that Dmitri was specifically using baby talk terms and potty, and the other one I didn't translate as a baby talk word because I didn't want to say it. Anyway, I'm finished talking about that. Today we have a letter from a little less than a month previously, also written from Haapsalu or Haapsalu in Estonia, where Ella had gone for health reasons and brought Dmitri with her. And yeah, so apparently they arrived there on the 18th of June. This letter is written on the 19th of June, and there's a little confusion, I'll say in advance, about dates and tenses, past versus present versus future. So there's this whole section where Dmitri talks about traveling for 9 days in a single month, and the verb forms, it makes it sound like it's all already happened, that it's in the past tense, except for the return to Petersburg. But I'm not sure about that. I'm not even sure if it had already happened or if it was still to happen. And so I apologize for the confusion because, people write eccentrically in diaries, or I should say idiosyncratically, and I'm just not sure about it. Anyway, here we go. Haapsalu, 19th June 1908. My dear Maria, I'm sending this letter from Haapsalu, where we arrived yesterday afternoon. Our house stands quite far from the sea, isolated in a rather large garden. The house itself is nice. It's white, 2 stories, and reminds me a little of Maria Alexandrovna Vasilchikova's place in Korolovo. What foreigners call a sea is nothing more than a big lake surrounded on all sides by shore with a very small outlet to the sea. The water is dirty, foul-smelling, not deep, very warm, and, in a word, boring. There is a so-called cure house here, where sometimes there is music. It's terribly boring to walk along the promenade, which is a shore a little better arranged with benches. So meaning that the promenade part of the shore is a little nicer than the non-promenade part because it has benches, I guess. Okay, I have to admit that the air here is wonderful, but everything else seems quite a bore. Thank God I'm leaving for Petersburg on the 15th, but there's one thing that bothers me, namely that they're placing me, as you probably know, in Uncle Aleksei's house, where it's terribly damp in bad weather and terribly hot in good weather. But I'm very happy about it, no matter where I end up living. I figured out that in 1 month I spent 9 days in a train carriage, which is a week and 2 days, 3 nights from Moscow to Paris, 2 nights from Paris to Sweden, 2 back again, 1 night here, and a night going back. During that time, I never spent more than 10 days in any one place. Not Paris, not Sweden, not Petersburg, and not Haapsalu. But I'm rambling. I'll return to the topic of Haapsalu. The rooms here are comfortable and quite cozy, but what's frightfully unpleasant is that there's no real running water. You know, there are water closets in every room, and after you empty various things from your body, they take it out and empty it in the garden, and now it smells very bad in the room again because my stomach hurts and I feel quite nauseated. The devil knows why. GM didn't come with me. He stayed with Maria Nikolaevna. I haven't heard anything about her here, but when I left, she was well. The doctors were very pleased. I was with her before my departure. She looked good, was very cheerful, and said she had almost no pain. That same day in Petersburg, we went to have tea with Uncle Alexei. It was very nice. I got a letter from Papa the other day. He writes that all is well, except Leela's brother died, and she went to Kissingen, and now the old mother is with Papa. Now I kiss you and your husband, and Black Mutzik kisses White Mutzik. So you're in Stenhammer. What's it like there? How's Mutzik? Your Dmitri. P.S. I'm sending the letter only blank. The last word I couldn't make out. Okay, you see what I mean about the confusion. I tend to think that what he's talking about is still to come, because you remember in his, well, I don't know. In the one letter that we did, the penultimate one, well, before this one, he was still waiting for permission from Nicholas to go to Sweden. And unfortunately, that letter was undated, which wasn't helpful. Anyway, it is what it is, you know. So here he is in Haapsalu with Ella. He's 16. He's bored. Vasilchikova. Yeah, she was, Maria Alexandrovna, she was a lady in waiting to Ella, and they were close friends. So it's not surprising that Dmitri had been to Korolova, her estate near Moscow. And so apparently it was similar to the house they're staying in Haapsalu. What he says about the water. I have never been to this place, but apparently he was wrong that it was a lake. It wasn't open sea, but it was a bay. It was a bay enclosed, very enclosed, with just, as he says, a narrow passage out to the sea itself. And it was indeed very shallow. So I looked up to see what I could find out about this place. It was very shallow. It was very warm. You could walk quite a distance out and not even have water up beyond your knees, I guess. And it did stink. It was the source of medicinal mud, which I guess must have been the treatment that Ella was having. It wasn't a mineral springs where you went and drank the water. It was a place where you went to have these mud treatments. And apparently the mud had something in it that was considered therapeutic, but that also stunk. So Dmitri's not just being rude about this. Apparently that really was a feature, that it kind of smelled like rotten eggs. So I guess people got used to it. The Cure House, we saw yesterday, the thumbnail picture attached to the video showed the Cure House in Haapsalu, and I should have used it for today's. I should note, well, let's see, 1 minute here. Yeah, in relation to Uncle Alexei, Grand Duke Aleksei Aleksandrovich, the thumbnail I used today was a picture of his, why is this so tilted? A picture of his palace in Petrograd. Sorry about that. Not in Petrograd, in Petersburg. That Dmitri, so the 15th, Dmitri says that he's very glad he'll be going to, thank God, I'm leaving for Petersburg on the 15th. Well, he's writing this on the 19th of June, and we know as of the 31st of August, he would be in the Crimea. So either we're talking about the 15th, no, it can't be. because he went directly from Haapsalu to, or from Sweden. He went directly from Sweden to the Crimea with just one night in Petrograd. So he must be talking about the 15th of September, because he was moving permanently to St. Petersburg to enroll in the Nicholas Cavalry School there. So that the 15th September would have been an appropriate date for that. He had a palace there on the Neva River. He had inherited it from, it wasn't Paul's palace, it was Dmitri's. He'd inherited it from Grand Duke Sergei, and it was the Belozerski Palace on the Neva, but he would not be moving into it. At least the plan at this point. I can't remember. I mean, I have to look, further at the letters from this time period, because I can't remember if he actually did move in with Grand Duke Aleksei Aleksandrovich, but he would be turning 17 in September, and so he was still too young to be on his own, in his own establishment. So Ella didn't want to move to St. Petersburg, and I'm sure Dmitri was very glad that she didn't want to move to St. Petersburg. She was a very strict guardian. It's funny, when Prince Wilhelm from Sweden came to visit his future bride, he was allowed to sit up with Ella at night and socialize with her, but Dmitri and Maria were sent to bed. So here's this girl on the verge of getting married, and she can't stay up with her fiancé and with her aunt. She has to go to bed. They were sent to bed, I think, between 9 and 10 o'clock. So I'm sure Dmitri was very glad to be away from that. And Uncle Alexei, okay, so what do we say about him? Grand Duke Aleksei Aleksandrovich, he was one of Dmitri's many uncles. Paul's brother, I think, which brother? There was the Tsarevich Nikolai, who died. Then there was Alexander, who became Alexander III. Then there was Vladimir, then Alexei, and then the two younger sons, Sergei and Paul. So yeah, Alexei was in his 50s. He was 58 at this time. He was, not popular. I think he was popular within the family. Apparently he was Nicholas II's favorite uncle, and, a fun guy to be around, and not a mean person or anything, pleasant person. But he had really screwed up. Forgive me for being crude, but during the Russo-Japanese War, and when he was the commander of the Russian Navy, and he was known to be very, very corrupt, and a lot of the money that should have gone to the Navy went into his pockets. And he had this beautiful palatial home in Paris, and he was a bon vivant and a bit of a hedonist, and just didn't take life too seriously. And then all of that blew up in his face, rightly so, during the Russo-Japanese War, when the fleet was not at all prepared to be a serious force. And he was so unpopular after that he had to resign. He was forced out from that position, and he couldn't stay for a while, for several months, I think, for quite a while. He had to leave Russia because his palace was vandalized, and he was, I think, hissed at when he went out in public. But at this point, he was in St. Petersburg. He was apparently prepared to take on the guardianship of Dmitri, but he was going to die later that year. So this is July. He would die in Paris in November at the age of 58. And so if, in fact, Dmitri moved into his palace, then he probably wasn't there and I'm sorry, this is probably very frustrating for you that I don't remember the details of whether Dmitri, because there are letters. There are these letters to Maria go all the way through, I think, 1911. And he talks about Alexei's death, but I just can't remember if he ever moved into Alexei's palace. Anyway, not so important. Incidentally, Alexei had a son. He wasn't married, but he had a natural son, as they say, and that son was already in his 30s. So he would not have been a young man of Dmitri's age. Okay, yes, the bathroom situation. Yeah, it doesn't sound pleasant. So a water closet, so you could go into, a little closet-sized room for privacy's sake. You weren't using a chamber pot per se, but it sounds like it was basically just a chamber pot inside a little fake bathroom kind of a thing. So yeah, that would be unpleasant. Yeah, and then they just dumped it out in the garden, which gross, but oh well, at least they weren't dumping it in the bay. So we find out that Laming was not with Dmitri, his sort of surrogate father, the man who'd been with him since he was 10 and supervising his daily life. His wife was sick. This is the Maria Nikolaevna of whom Dmitri writes. And so he was staying with her. So Dmitri we know he had Joseph, his valet, with him, but I don't know if there was anybody else sort of taking Laming's place. He doesn't mention it, so probably not. So he's gotten this letter from Paul, and Paul, somebody has died, Leela's brother. I've never, ever heard Dmitri use the word Leela to refer to his stepmother. So I doubt it's her unless, I don't know, I suppose it could be a one-time thing. I've never heard of anybody else calling her Leela. But Leela's brother had died. There was something to do with Bad Kissingen in Germany. And now Papa had the old mother on his hands. So I don't know. Again, was this Olga Palet's mother? I don't know, but she was there with Paul. Leela was in Bad Kissingen, and Paul had the mother-in-law, or whoever this old woman was. The Mutsiks. Okay, let's talk about them. Mutsiks, they were dogs. Dmitri talks about Mutsik on other occasions, and apparently each of the siblings had a Mutsik. Each of the siblings had a dog with this name, and Dmitri's was black, and Maria's was white. In one of the other letters, Dmitri asks specifically if he can bring his dog with him to Sweden. So I guess that was Black Mutsik. It's spelled in English letters, in Latin letters, it's spelled Mutsik. No idea if it means anything. And he asks his sister about Stenhammar. I don't know how you pronounce that, but it was her home, her house. It was a palace, and it was given to her and her husband, and her, I should say, as their home. So here she was, this very young woman. She was, 18 years old. And she had her own household, unlike Dmitri, who was still sort of being treated like a child and needed to live with a guardian. That would have been, such a big transition for Maria. It's hard to imagine going from being sent to bed by your aunt at 9 o'clock to having your own grand household, and you're the mistress of the house. Anyway, next time, I don't know. Again, as before, I'm not sure whether next time we'll have a 1917 diary entry. I need to do the translating, or if we'll have another one of these letters. So anyway, I hope you've been enjoying them, and I'll see you next time. Bye.